Cowboy bathed in the wrong river. The Apache chief declared, "Whoever bathes in this water will marry my daughter." The cowboy's clothes were dirty, his face burned by the sun, and his body sore from long hours in the saddle. He was used to hard travel, but this journey felt heavier than most. Water had become rare, and every mile made his throat feel drier. He was not a man who talked much. Life on the trail had taught him to depend on himself. He trusted his horse, his instincts, and the sky above him. He had heard stories about this land, stories of danger, warnings whispered by other travelers, and rumors about tribes who protected their territory strongly. But stories did not stop a man who had work to do. He needed to move forward. By midday, the heat became unbearable. The air felt thick, and even breathing seemed like work. The cowboy wiped his forehead with his sleeve and looked around. That was when he noticed something different in the distance. Between rocky hills and tall trees there was a small line of green. Green meant life. Green meant water. Hope pushed his tired body forward. As he got closer, he could hear a soft sound like a quiet song. It was water flowing gently over stones. The sight felt almost unreal after so many dry days. A clear river moved calmly through the land, shining under the sun. The water looked cool and clean, reflecting the sky like glass. The cowboy stopped his horse at the edge of the river. He looked around carefully. The area felt peaceful, almost protected. Tall trees stood on both sides and birds rested on branches above. There were no signs, no fences, no warnings that he could see. No one was around. To him, it felt like a gift given by nature at the perfect moment. His body ached and his mind felt heavy. Without thinking too much, he slid off his horse and tied the reins to a nearby tree. He knelt by the river and dipped his hands into the water. The cold surprised him. It felt refreshing, like relief flowing straight into his bones. He drank deeply, letting the water calm his burning throat. Then, feeling safe and alone, he made a decision that would change his life forever. He removed his boots and hat and stepped into the river. The water reached his ankles, then his knees. He let out a long breath, one he did not realize he had been holding for days. Slowly, he washed his face, his arms, and then his whole body. Dirt and sweat disappeared into the flowing water. For the first time in a long while, he felt clean, light, and human again. He did not know this river was sacred. As he bathed, he did not hear the soft movement in the trees. He did not see the shadows shifting quietly behind him. His eyes were closed, enjoying the moment, unaware that he was being watched. When he finally stepped out of the river, reaching for his clothes, a strange silence filled the air. The birds had stopped singing. The wind felt still. He sensed something was wrong before he saw anything. Then he turned around. Several men stood at the edge of the trees. They were Apache warriors, calm and strong, their eyes sharp and focused. They did not rush him. They did not shout. They simply stood there, watching him as if they had all the time in the world. The cowboy froze. His heart started beating fast, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had heard enough stories to know that sudden moves could make things worse. Slowly, he raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. His clothes were still wet, his boots in his hands, and his rifle resting against a tree far from reach. The warriors spoke among themselves in low voices. Their faces showed no anger but also no friendliness. After a moment, one of them stepped forward and gestured for the cowboy to follow. The cowboy nodded. He knew arguing would not help. He dressed quickly, mounted his horse, and followed them at a slow pace. His mind raced with questions. Had he crossed into forbidden land? Had he broken a rule he did not know existed? They traveled for some time, deeper into the land. The path led to a village hidden among trees and hills. Small homes stood in neat order and people moved quietly about their daily lives. When the villagers noticed the stranger, they paused and watched him with curiosity. The cowboy felt every eye on him. He was led to the center of the village where an older man sat calmly. His posture was straight, his presence powerful without effort. This was the chief. His face carried the weight of many years and many decisions. He did not look angry. He looked thoughtful. The warriors explained what had happened. The chief listened without interrupting. His eyes rested on the cowboy, studying him closely. The cowboy stood still, removing his hat as a sign of respect. Finally, the chief spoke. His voice was firm but calm. He explained that the river the cowboy had bathed in was not an ordinary river. It was sacred to the tribe. Long ago, an agreement was made to protect it. The water was meant only for special purposes and strict rules surrounded it. The cowboy swallowed hard. He lowered his head slightly and spoke honestly. He said he did not know. He had not meant any disrespect. He was tired, thirsty, and alone. The river had looked free and open to anyone in need. The chief watched him carefully as he spoke. Truth was easy to hear when a man spoke from the heart. Still, tradition was tradition. The chief then explained the ancient rule tied to the river. His words were clear and heavy. Whoever bathed in that water would be bound by an old promise, a promise that could not be ignored easily. The cowboy's eyes widened as he listened. He could not believe what he was hearing. His life on the road had prepared him for danger, hunger, and hard choices, but not for this. The village fell silent. The chief raised his hand, signaling that no decision would be made immediately. The cowboy would stay in the village until the elders spoke further. He would be treated fairly, but he would not be free to leave yet. That night, the cowboy sat alone near a small fire. The stars above looked brighter than anywhere he had been before. His horse rested nearby, and the sounds of the village carried softly through the air. He replayed the day again and again in his mind. A simple mistake, a moment of relief, a river that changed everything. He did not know what awaited him tomorrow. He only knew that the path he had been following had ended, and a new one had begun. One shaped not by the open road, but by tradition, fate, and a river he should never have entered. And somewhere in the village, unseen by him, the chief's daughter listened quietly, already aware that a stranger's choice had awakened an old promise that could not be forgotten. Morning came slowly to the village. Soft light touched the land, and the quiet sounds of daily life began again. The cowboy woke up where he had been allowed to rest, near the edge of the village. He sat up, stretched his tired body, and took a deep breath. The air felt clean and calm, but his thoughts were heavy. He knew he was not free to leave, and he did not know what decision would be made about his future. People moved around him, but no one spoke directly to him yet. Some glanced at him with curiosity, others with caution. He tried to read their faces, but they revealed little. He reminded himself to stay respectful. He had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the best choice. Not long after the sun rose higher, two men approached him. They gestured for him to follow. The cowboy nodded and walked with them, keeping his head slightly lowered. They led him to a large open space where elders were already gathered. The chief sat among them, calm and steady, as if he had been waiting for this moment. The cowboy stopped a few steps away. He removed his hat again and waited. The chief began to speak. His voice was clear, carrying across the open space. He spoke of the river and its meaning. He told a story passed down through generations. Long ago, the river had saved the tribe during a time of great hardship. From that moment, it became sacred, protected by a promise meant to keep it pure and respected. The promise was not created to trap strangers. It was meant to remind everyone that actions, even small ones, carry weight. The chief then spoke the words that made the cowboy's heart feel heavy. He said that anyone who bathed in the sacred river accepted the old rule tied to it. The rule had been spoken clearly for many years, and it could not be ignored easily. The cowboy felt the eyes of the elders on him. He took a slow breath and spoke honestly. He explained again that he did not know the river was sacred. He spoke of his long journey, the heat, the thirst, and the relief he felt when he saw the water. He said he meant no disrespect and would never have entered the river if he had known its meaning. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. The elders listened quietly. Some nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Others remained silent, thinking deeply. Tradition was important, but so was fairness. The village had faced such moments before, where the past and present met in difficult ways. The chief raised his hand and the murmurs stopped. He said the rule was old, but wisdom was older. He would not rush a decision. The cowboy would stay in the village while the elders discussed what should be done. The cowboy bowed his head slightly, grateful for the chance to be heard. Over the next few days, the cowboy remained in the village. He was not treated as a prisoner, but he was never alone. Someone was always nearby, watching quietly. He was given food, water, and a place to rest. Though he was far from home and unsure of his future, he noticed the fairness in how he was treated. Slowly, he began to observe the life around him. The village moved with a rhythm he had never known. People worked together, shared meals, and spoke with respect to one another. Children laughed and played, elders shared stories, and the land was treated with care. One afternoon, an older man approached the cowboy and gestured for him to sit. This man spoke calmly and explained parts of the tribe's way of life. He taught the cowboy how they honored nature, how every river, tree, and stone had meaning. The cowboy listened carefully, realizing how little he truly knew about the land he had traveled through for years. Each lesson made his mistake feel heavier, but also clearer. During this time, the chief's daughter often observed from a distance. She did not speak to the cowboy, but she watched how he behaved. She noticed how he helped where he could, how he spoke kindly, and how he never acted with pride. He carried himself with humility, accepting his situation without anger. One evening, the elders gathered again. The cowboy was called forward. The air felt tense. He stood quietly, his heart beating fast. The chief spoke once more. He said that the rule existed to teach responsibility, not to cause harm. He said the elders were divided. Some believed tradition must be followed exactly. Others believed the stranger's honesty mattered. The chief then said something that surprised everyone. He said the old rule spoke of duty, but it did not speak of force. Respect must go both ways. He declared that no final decision would be made without the voice of the one most affected by the promise. The village fell silent. The cowboy did not fully understand what that meant yet, but he sensed that something important had shifted. The rule was no longer just a command. It had become a question of honor, choice, and understanding. That night, the cowboy sat by the fire again, staring into the flames. He thought about the road he had traveled, the freedom he once took for granted, and the people around him now. He realized that life had slowed him down, forcing him to see beyond his own journey. For the first time, he wondered if fate had brought him to that river for a reason he could not yet understand. In the quiet of the village, under a sky full of stars, the old promise waited, not as a threat, but as a test. Days passed quietly, but each day carried a new weight for the cowboy. He woke up with the sun, helped when he was allowed to, and stayed silent when silence was needed. He no longer felt like a stranger walking through the village. Instead, he felt like a guest whose presence was being carefully measured. Every action mattered. Every word mattered. The elders had not yet made a final decision, but the atmosphere had changed. There was less tension and more observation. People watched how the cowboy treated the land, how he spoke to others, and how he carried himself when no one seemed to be paying attention. Respect, he had learned, was not something you claimed. It was something others decided you earned. One morning, he was asked to help gather wood with a small group of men. They did not speak much, but they showed him what to do. He followed their lead, working steadily, never rushing. Though his hands were used to hard work, this felt different. It was not about speed or strength. It was about balance and care. He noticed how they chose fallen branches instead of cutting living trees. That simple act taught him more than words could. As the days went on, small conversations began, short questions, quiet answers. He learned names and they learned his. He spoke about where he came from, not with pride, but with honesty. He did not hide his mistakes or pretend to be more than he was. That honesty slowly opened doors. The chief's daughter continued to watch him. She was known in the village as someone who listened more than she spoke. She was thoughtful, strong in her own way, and deeply aware of the traditions she had grown up with. The old promise tied to the river was not just a rule to her. It was a part of her life, one that had shaped her future long before she understood it. She noticed how the cowboy treated elders with respect. She noticed how he waited patiently instead of demanding answers. She saw how children felt safe enough to sit nearby and watch him work. None of this went unnoticed. One afternoon, she crossed paths with him near the edge of the village. It was the first time they stood close to one another. The moment felt quiet and serious. The cowboy lowered his head slightly, unsure of what to say. He did not want to offend her with the wrong words. She spoke first. Her voice was calm, steady, and clear. She asked him if he understood why the river mattered so much. He nodded and answered honestly. He said he was beginning to understand, but he knew there was still much he did not know. He said the river had given him relief, but it had also taught him humility. She listened carefully. She then asked him a question that surprised him. She asked if he believed rules should exist without choice. The cowboy thought for a moment before answering. He said rules were important, but they should guide people, not trap them. He said respect meant understanding, not fear. She did not respond right away. She simply nodded and walked away, leaving him standing there with a strange feeling in his chest. That brief exchange stayed with him long after she was gone. Later that evening, the elders gathered again. This time the chief's daughter was present. Her presence alone told everyone that the moment had arrived. The cowboy stood at a respectful distance, his heart steady but heavy. The chief spoke about the river once more. He spoke about the past, about promises, and about responsibility. Then he spoke about the present. He said times change, but values should not be lost. He said tradition must be protected, but never at the cost of fairness. Then the chief's daughter spoke. She spoke clearly and without fear. She said the river was sacred because it taught respect. She said the promise tied to it was meant to guide behavior, not remove choice. She said the stranger had shown humility, patience, and understanding. She said no union should be born from force or fear. Her words carried weight. The village listened in silence. Even the elders who favored strict tradition could not ignore her reasoning. She did not ask for the rule to be broken. She asked for it to be honored in its true spirit. The chief turned to the cowboy and asked him to speak, not as a stranger, but as a man standing between two paths. The cowboy took a deep breath. He said he never intended to change their ways. He said he respected their customs and understood the seriousness of the promise. He said he would accept responsibility for his mistake, but he would not want anyone's life decided without choice. His voice did not shake. That night, no final decision was announced, but something had changed again. The promise no longer felt like a shadow hanging over him. It felt like a door slowly opening, revealing a future shaped by understanding rather than fear. As the fire burned low and the stars filled the sky, the cowboy realized that the river had not only washed dust from his body. It had washed away the life he thought he understood, leaving space for something deeper, something earned. The path ahead was still unclear, but for the first time since stepping into that river, he did not feel lost. The next morning arrived quietly, as if the land itself was waiting. The cowboy woke before sunrise, sitting up slowly and looking around the village. Everything felt familiar now. The soft sounds of footsteps, the smell of firewood, the calm way people greeted the day. Yet his heart felt different. He knew this day would decide his future. He walked to the edge of the village and stood there for a long moment, watching the sky change colors. He thought about the road he once followed, the open land, and the freedom he believed was everything. Now, standing here, he realized freedom was not only about moving forward. Sometimes it was about standing still and accepting what life placed before you. As the sun rose, word quietly spread through the village. The elders would gather one last time. A final decision would be made. The cowboy washed his face, straightened his clothes, and walked calmly toward the gathering place. His steps were steady, not rushed. Fear no longer guided him. Whatever happened, he wanted to face it with honesty. The elders sat in a wide circle. The chief was there, calm and thoughtful. Beside him sat his daughter, composed and strong. The people of the village gathered at a respectful distance, forming a quiet presence around the circle. The chief began to speak. He spoke of the past, of the promise tied to the river, and of the responsibility placed on those who protected it. He reminded everyone that tradition was the backbone of the tribe, giving it strength and identity. But then his voice softened slightly as he spoke of wisdom. He said wisdom was knowing when to listen, when to adapt, and when to let truth guide decisions. He turned to his daughter and asked her to speak again, not as his child, but as a woman whose life was tied to the promise. She stood slowly. Her voice was calm but firm. She said the river had brought a stranger into their lives, but it had also revealed his character. She said she had watched him carefully, not just his words but his actions. She spoke of his respect, his patience, and his willingness to learn. She then spoke of choice. She said no bond should begin with fear or pressure. A true union must come from understanding and willingness. She said if tradition was to be honored, it must be honored with dignity for everyone involved. Her words settled into the hearts of the listeners. The chief then turned to the cowboy. He asked him a simple question. Did he wish to leave if he were allowed? The cowboy paused. This was the moment he had been preparing for, though he did not know how it would feel. He thought of the road, the endless travel, the loneliness he had accepted as normal. He then thought of the village, the people, the calm rhythm of life, and the respect he had found here. He spoke slowly and clearly. He said he came to the river by accident, but nothing since then felt meaningless. He said he had found something here he did not know he was missing: connection, purpose, and understanding. He said if he were allowed to leave, he could. But if he were allowed to stay, not by force but by choice, he would do so with honor. Silence followed his words. The chief closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. He nodded once. He declared that the promise would stand, but in its truest form. There would be no force, no command. The choice would belong to both sides, freely and openly. The village breathed as one. The chief's daughter turned to the cowboy and asked him if he was willing to learn their ways, respect their land, and walk beside her as an equal, not as an owner or a ruler. The cowboy met her gaze. He nodded and answered yes, not quickly, not eagerly, but with certainty. The chief then asked his daughter if she accepted this path, knowing it would shape her life. She answered yes with the same calm certainty. The decision was made. There was no celebration that day, no loud gathering or grand display. Instead, there was quiet acceptance. The people returned to their tasks, carrying the moment with them. Respect had been shown and balance restored. In the days that followed, the cowboy began a new life, not as an outsider but not pretending to be something he was not. He learned more deeply now. He learned the language, the stories, and the meaning behind daily routines. He worked alongside others, shared meals, and listened more than he spoke. The chief's daughter and the cowboy spent time together, slowly and naturally. They talked about the past, about hopes, and about the future. There was no rush. Trust grew in small moments, in shared walks, quiet conversations, and mutual respect. When the time came for the union, it was simple and meaningful. The ceremony took place near the river, but not in it. The water flowed gently, unchanged, as if watching with quiet approval. Words were spoken about unity, responsibility, and respect. No promises were forced. Each vow was given freely. The cowboy stood there, no longer defined by the road he once traveled, but by the life he chose to build. As time passed, he became a bridge between two worlds. He shared what he knew, and he learned what he did not. He helped others understand that respect was not about fear or control, but about listening and care. The river remained sacred, its story passed down with a new lesson added, not about punishment, but about understanding. And whenever the cowboy stood by its edge, he remembered the moment he stepped into its waters without knowing, and how that single act led him not to loss, but to a life he never imagined, shaped by choice, respect, and a promise honored the right way.